Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2.
Hello, how are you? I'm so sorry I cannot be in Vienna for the meeting, but unfortunately, as you know, there are many things happening in Brazil, including Hello, how are you? I'm so sorry I cannot be in Vienna for the meeting, but unfortunately, as you know, there are many things happening in Brazil, including the BRICS summit, and I'm here in Rio de Janeiro, and I wanted to thank UNIDO and thank DG Gerd Müller for the invitation to come to Vienna and send a brief message to you about COP30 and how much we can work together. UNIDO concentrates on some themes that are absolutely essential for the implementation of the Paris Accord. That's why we count very much on UNIDO for the action agenda, because we have enough decisions under the convention and under the Paris Accord to implement. This has to be a cup of solution, a cup of good ideas, and a cup of good examples. And this is why we structured the action agenda based on the GST. So since everybody agreed with the GST in Dubai, let's take what we agreed and now start to implement it. So I want to thank you all and count on your presence in Belém for us to work in the Mutirão. We're all together doing what we do best towards the fight against climate change and the just transition. Thank you very much.
Anna, can you hear me?
Testing, testing.
Right. Yeah. Then you like need to Test, one, two, three. Test, 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 test.
Just hide it there.
Day 2 of the global green. Okay, great. Then I'll turn it off. It works, right? Yeah. And yeah. Okay.
Did you hear it?
One, two. Check one, two. Check one, two.
1, 2, 3, test. Yeah. Test 1, 2, 3. Good morning, everyone. We're about to start in a little bit. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Amazing that you're here already. We wanted to ask everyone that's like on the outer skirts of the room if you actually want to move more into the center. I think it will make for a bit more of a cozy get together. So if you could, thank you so much. Good morning, hello, and welcome everybody. It's amazing to see you all back here today on this second day of the Global Green Industrialization Dialogue. I would say we have our early birds right here up in the room because we did have a jam-packed program yesterday looking at some of the biggest levers, right, that we need to sort of set in motion when it comes to this industrial transformation towards greenery that we need to make. I mean, we talked about finance, about technology, about innovation. We touched upon many other topics that will probably also come back today. But most of all, it's very good to see that you're all back here, hopefully energized for this second and final day of the dialogue. Now, to all those of you joining us online, I would also say to you, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from whichever part of the world that you're watching from. And thank you so much for tuning in. If you're tuning in for the first time today, I'll say hi. My name is Hajer Koubi. I'm a former United Nations Youth Representative for the Netherlands. But above all, I'm very delighted to be your moderator for today on this final day. And not the least of which, because again, we have a very interesting program in store for you. Because today we'll focus on two other very critical factors and pillars that we have planned to speak about when it comes to making this global green industrial transition that we need to make. I mean, we're going to take a better look at how we can put people at the center of the approaches that we have, at the centers of the strategies that we have, and how we can develop clean tech supply chains. So a lot that we have in store, but we're going to kick off this morning with a spotlight on UNIDO's approach to the just energy transition, because we know that this shift to sort of clean energy, it's not just about megawatts, it's not just about technologies, it's about justice, it's about ensuring that people have access, it's about ensuring opportunity and equity in the process of it as well. And to help open that session, I'm delighted to first welcome someone who has been a guiding voice within UNIDO's energy work for many years. So please do join me in welcoming to the stage the Director of the Division of Energy and Climate Action at UNIDO. May we have a big round of applause, everyone, for Ms. Rana Gonaim. Rana, I would say the stage is all yours.
Thank you, Hajar, and good morning, everyone. Thank you indeed for joining us this morning. We've had a very exciting day yesterday, but the energy is still here, driving the dialogue, and I hope you're all also as energized as we are. So all of you know UNIDO has been working on the topic of energy for quite a while. We've been a very active voice in shaping the discussion on the role of energy in sustainable development, and that has been historically really the anchor that we've worked on. Nevertheless, moving now into the next decade and looking at 2050, we really see that we need to also look into turning that discussion around, because while energy is a very important source of livelihoods, it's an important source for comfort, it's an important source for us for having lighting. I mean, we cannot have our meeting today and so many more things. But at the end of the day, to make it relevant for least developing countries, for small island states and others, we need to look at energy as a source of economic diversification. And how can we really help grow industries that drive livelihood also at the national level? So we're really thinking through our approach and strategy for the just energy transition, looking specifically at these elements. How do we bring the nexus of climate, energy, and industry into a meaningful intervention that helps UNIDO deliver more impactful programs for its member states? And for that, we've embarked on developing our Just Energy Transition strategy. And through the discussion that we will have today, we wanted you really to have a flair of the various programs that we have, but also our initial thinking regarding the strategy. We will be finalizing the strategy in the lead up to our general conference that will be taking place in November in Riyadh. So really, we invite you to be participating and giving us also your insights into how our strategy connects also with the work that you are doing, and how do you see also the role of industry in driving the energy transition beyond just decarbonization, really looking at fueling green growth in the best way possible. So I know we're gonna learn more about the program, so I'll hand back over to you, Hajar, to kick us off. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We indeed have a big round of applause, everyone, for Rana for setting the scene for us. Because indeed, we're going to build on that, setting the scene a little bit more. And we're going to move into the very heart of this session, which is going to be a conversation that brings together UNIDO project managers from across regions and sectors, each working on a different dimension, so to say, of a just energy transition. And to guide us through that, I'm happy to hand over to someone who lives and breathes this topic. As my colleague Teresa said, what a great way to start the morning with hope. And so we plan to get as close to that as we could by handing over to Christopher Hope, the Energy Transition Specialist at UNIDO, and your trusted moderator for this session. So I would say, please give him a big round of applause. And then Christopher, the stage is all yours.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome back again to day 2 of the Global Green Industrialization Dialogue. My name is Christopher Hope, as forewarned, and I'm an energy transition specialist here within UNIDO. I'm going to be I'll be guiding us through this opening session of the day, which will talk through, as Rana mentions, UNIDO's ongoing approach to the just energy transition. And I'll be joined after I've given an initial presentation on the subject by a number of my colleagues who will help us to talk through this subject. The purpose of this short opening session for day 2 is that we are going to try to explain or explore the relevance of the just energy transition concept to the themes of green industrialization, so the overall themes of the dialogue that we're exploring today. And I hope that what that will do is help to frame the conversations for the rest of the day and give it a little bit of a narrative steer there. So what we'll do is we'll begin with a short description, as I say from myself, of the just energy transition concept and how we can conceive of it and help it to frame the ambitions of this dialogue. And then I will invite my colleagues onto the stage and we'll have a short Q&A such that they can outline some of the detail of how UNIDO seeks to have an impact on this subject of the just energy transition. So if we can go to the slides, please. So I've just got 2 that I'm going to talk through. And this first one speaks to an overall conceptualization, as I say, of the just energy transition topic. It's based on our work that we've conducted and a review of literature, of the way that different academics and governments and leaders try to talk about this subject. And we tried to distill it into a few central elements here. A bit of background, just energy transition concept, as many of you know, originates from the labor movement and was traditionally associated with concerns over protecting worker rights in the phase out of coal and other fossil fuels. But it has broadened into a much larger concept of how we consider justice within the transition to a low carbon economy. And an important point to note within this is this idea that there are trade-offs within the energy transition. So it's not always the case that we're moving in this linear direction, and there are difficult questions that have to be answered. For example, balancing the economic or societal gains or opportunities through coal production against climate objectives, or the decision around setting up a large wind farm in an area that might have negative biodiversity impacts or impacts on local communities that are suboptimal. So ultimately, moving through the energy transition requires consideration of how these competing goals are balanced. And as I've shown in this slide here, there are these different dimensions in which we try to think about the just energy transition and as it's presented typically in the literature. So at this global level, to begin with, we have this sense of the need that if we're promoting the energy transition, we should be doing so in a way that elevates global South voices in shaping that overall global direction. It shouldn't be something that's dictated from a select few. And similarly, we know that there are ample economic opportunities within the energy transition, and we should be working to ensure that those opportunities can be captured by global South countries. Looking at the national level then, there's a few different points mentioned in this slide, but the idea of improving livelihoods for the most vulnerable in society through energy access, through utilization of these energy transition technologies in a way that means that the most vulnerable are afforded benefit. And we should also certainly be looking to protect workers within that transition, thinking through the phase out of coal and what that means in terms of workers, but also the opportunities around creating a skilled green workforce within a country that is able to take advantage of this transition. And then finally, at the local level, I'm really thinking about those that are on the front lines of the energy transition. So communities close to mines for the production of critical minerals that we were talking about yesterday during the GGID, also those that are close to sustainable industrialization hubs and making sure that those communities can thrive. And then, of course, within that, also protecting the local environment around the energy transition. And cutting across all of that is this idea of transversal justice. So the big theme that we've been talking about over the last day, at least, is this idea of putting people at the center of the energy transition. I'll just turn to my last slide, which I'm not going to discuss in such detail. But this is, I think, a quite helpful framework that we utilize for thinking about how across different stages of the value chain of the energy transition, there are questions of justice. As I say, I'm not going to go through all of these, but the point is looking from top to bottom, firstly beginning with the extraction of the critical minerals for the energy transition, then thinking through the manufacture, the production of those, and then the actual operation of renewable energy or clean technology sites, and then the consumption all the way through to how we design the markets and how industrial actors use these. The point, I think, is clear, which is that there are just energy transition dynamics across the value chain, and that's what we should be working on collectively to address. And particularly underpinning these as well, I think is clear, is industry. So there is industry across all of these dynamics or all of these stages of the value chain, of course, and that's where UNIDO sees a role in making sure that the industry that's underpinning the energy transition is done in a way that's inclusive and sustainable. And so with that said, I want to invite, as I say, three of my colleagues on the stage who work through these subjects and will give us a bit of an indication of how we approach that. So let me invite onto the stage Olga Rataj, Gershwin Makur, who are industrial development officers here at UNIDO, and Manasa Suresh, who is an associate industrial development associate. Good morning, colleagues. We are going to just keep it to one question each for this morning, with the idea being that you can highlight the different elements of the work that you're doing, and particularly thinking, as I articulated, about these local, national, and global levels of justice, as well as that idea of a people-centered transition. And I'm going to go left to right across from my colleagues. And so I'll start, Olga, with you and the work that you conduct on sustainable cities. And what I wanted us to discuss is thinking about how UNIDO's work on sustainable cities tries to address that tension between the decarbonization objectives that we have on the one hand, and then these questions of equity or justice. And thinking then in the context of cities, what a people-centered transition looks like.
Thanks a lot, Chris, for your question. And firstly, let me underline that in our work on cities, we take a systemic approach, which is very much aligned with what you presented at the beginning. So in the context of cities, we work across different sectors, including, for example, energy, waste, water, transport, buildings, which is the horizontal systemic approach, but also we try to align vertically with what is happening at the national and global level, as you also highlighted in your introductory remarks. So this is very important to address the trade-offs between different values, the environmental, social, and economic values. In the context of cities, the equity aspect is very important and also quite special to address because cities are like world in a smaller scale. So we have the opportunity to really listen to the voices of people, to interact with them directly and to address their concerns and maximize their opportunities. So this is why I value the work on cities a lot, and I think it provides an opportunity to have a real impact for UNIDO. And I would like to provide one project example which presents the systemic approach. And namely, this is an example of a city of Guntur in India, which was one of 5 cities supported through a JEF-funded program of value of 12 million US dollars. And in Guntur, we worked closely with women since we realized that they are mostly engaged in the informal sector as rag pickers, which was not the best productive activity for this vulnerable group. And we decided to train women as operators of electric vehicles that were picking the waste. So this project involved upskilling of women and also providing them with secure jobs and also opportunities to be engaged in other sectors in the future in case they decided not to be involved in the waste management sector anymore. So the social value was very important in this project, but also others such as environmental through the deployment of electric vehicles. And what is also interesting is that there was a floating solar panel installed that was offsetting the electricity consumption by the electric vehicles. So this presents very well how we worked across different sectors and addressed different values at the local level. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Olga. It's a really good example, and I think it's important the way that you discuss that reality of trade-offs that exist in thinking about the energy transition, and the example you give is certainly constructive in that space. I'll move through to Manasa next and the work that you do looking at clean tech innovation, principally in the global south. But the question, or the interesting dynamic that I want to think about in relation to the just energy transition is how that work to foster clean tech innovation can work to support both vulnerable groups or marginal groups in society through that innovation process, but also help countries that you work on to advance their global position within the energy transition?
Thank you, Chris, and good morning to everyone. So at UNIDO, we work on Global Clean Tech Innovation Program, or GCIP as we call it in short. So this program focuses on supporting local entrepreneurs and startups to drive clean tech innovation, and which is rooted in the national context and inclusive in design. So through mainly from GSEP example, what we have learned is that the clean tech innovation kind of drives the national innovation, making sure that this is much more inclusive in design. And we make sure that the clean tech innovation is also not just creating the technology that is needed, but it's also creating an ecosystem within the national context. So what is mostly important is that inclusive innovation and ecosystem, which is established both at the local level as well as at the national level, is quite imperative. So what we have seen from the GSEP example is that we just don't do the work on the technology aspect, but we kind of create the ecosystem as a whole. And just to point out an example from the GSEP, we have had two innovation challenges which focus in India and Namibia. And what we have seen there is that supporting local entrepreneurs and startups have helped them to kind of address their own energy related challenges, which in turn kind of addresses the economic opportunity challenges, at the same time kind of bringing in the inclusion perspective and trying to address the gap on the inclusion simultaneously. So this is much more relevant in the case of Global South, because this is where, mostly the formal employment is quite limited. And I think this is the multiplier effect that it has, that it creates more of an ecosystem as well as more of job opportunities for the vulnerable groups, also keeping in mind the women and youth who are meant to be part of this whole of the value chain, not just on the technology generation, but the idea is to create the value chain for the green technology, meaning that they are involved in the case of extraction of materials, in terms of manufacturing, in terms of production, as well as looking into the end users. So we just don't want them to be the beneficiaries, but also more of it making an agent of change in terms of how they get involved in this process. And secondly, we also focus on inclusive business model. Like I mentioned, that we just don't focus on, like technology. We try to build an ecosystem and a business model in a way that's more inclusive, and making sure that it's not just focusing on the technology, but more of creating a value chain. And this is much more effective in the case of Global South. And lastly, of course, we also focus on policy innovation, which is equally as important as the technology innovation, because policy is something that needs to be created, making sure there is a conducive environment for clean tech to evolve and thrive. And not just on the technology aspect, but also on how startups and enterprises can set up their businesses, how to make sure that the people like women and youth who are not being still involved in most of the formal employment can still be part of this whole value chain process. So I think this is where the policy makes a huge difference, and also bringing in the fact that we need the financial mechanisms to make sure these startups and enterprises can unlock and make sure their solutions can be commercialized and brought into the market, which in turn also serves the purpose of the vulnerable groups and the population. So the economic opportunity in Global South typically lies in becoming like a solution provider and not just as a technology recipient. So when we support Global South entrepreneurs and innovators, especially to develop their own clean tech solution for the market, we are actually changing our model from like the traditional approach of technology transfer to more of technology generation and export. So I think this is where the Global South has a lot of potential to develop clean tech solutions and make it as an economic opportunity for them. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Manasa. I really like that example, thinking about the case in Namibia, for instance, of you're creating these economic opportunities related to the provision of energy. And it speaks, of course, to this idea of supply chains for clean tech that we'll be speaking about a little later today, and also bringing not just that point on ecosystems, as you mentioned, but then also the policy structure. And that, as you say, speaks to this idea of national justice in terms of ensuring opportunities for different groups in society, but then global justice in terms of that idea of how you're giving opportunities for these nations to participate in the economic opportunity. So I will go finally to my colleague Gershwin for the last question before we wrap up this session. And go zooming out a little bit from the local and then national level. Gershwin, I was hoping we could talk about the Global South leadership dynamic within this. And we were speaking, you and I, in an event yesterday towards this subject. And I wanted to know from your work what you consider to be the most important considerations for strengthening Global South leadership within the energy transition, and how do you or UNIDO try to bear that in mind in thinking about the role that UNIDO can play in supporting countries?
Thank you, Chris. And good morning to everyone. The first thing I would say is voices. You spoke earlier in your presentation about voices. Are we listening? In the Global South, where I'm from as well, I don't think the voices of the Global South are being listened to as much as we think they are. So we need to, as UNIDO and as a broader community of collaborators and partners, we need to be listening to the needs of the Global South. Specifically, in a project that we are working on at the moment, we are working in with the least developed country group on climate change, and working to help and contribute to their efforts to be heard around the issue of justice in the energy transition. Now, there are a number of issues there that obviously need to be heard. One of them is that we are trying to help raise this voice by bringing together a secretariat for the LDC group on climate change and situating them near the UNFCCC offices, so that hopefully the voices are louder the closer they are. And we've been quite successful in doing that. So that's one aspect, but there are a number of issues that we as UNIDO, we as partners need to be engaged with our partners in the Global South. From a leadership perspective, we need to support individually, because we heard yesterday that we cannot take a cookie cutter approach to this. We cannot think that every solution is the same for everyone, but we need to understand the local context. We need to work directly locally with countries in understanding their policy issues, which UNIDO is quite good at helping countries with. We need to understand with them what kind of finances are needed to effect this kind of energy transition we speak of. Yesterday, again, I emphasized this point that we tend to use the words we need to, we should, and we must. We are supposed to do more and not only need, should, must. And so thankfully with UNIDO, we are doing more. We are engaged already with the LDC group, for example, and other Global South actors and governments in moving towards our ambition around this energy transition. So from my perspective, we need to be and continue to be needs-driven and people-centric. Manasseh spoke about the Global Clean Tech Innovation Program, for example. When involved in a program like that, for example, we need to say, who is the most important in this program? The most important is the person who is running the business. So it's the person who is the most important. And so as much as we can, we should be addressing the people-centered approach, not leaving anyone behind. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much, Gershwin, and I really appreciate that point laying out the challenges, the fact that it is difficult we talk about promoting Global South voice and leadership in this subject, but recognizing the challenges at hand, and then your point as well on delivery ultimately, and something of a call to action, which I think is an appropriate way to finish this conversation and to turn us on to the agenda for the rest of the day. So I hope that this conversation has been helpful in pulling out some of those local, national, global dynamics around justice that hopefully we can then explore today, particularly thinking about, as I say, the role of people, which we'll be covering next with regards to the process of green industrialization, and then also thinking, of course, about clean tech supply chains and the way that those can be developed. And then finally, just to reiterate the point that Rana made at the start, that we are continuing to evolve this UNIDO approach to the just energy transition. It's about partnerships, including with people in the room, so feel free to approach me and we can discuss later. So please just join me in a round of applause again for our panelists.
Thank you so much. And may we also have a big round of applause, everyone, for our formidable moderator, Christopher Hope. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks. I think we have a short video. Let's see if it plays. Okay, there it is. Now, everybody, we're going to dive into our very first high-level plenary session of today, of this second and final day of the Global Green Industrialization Dialogue, which is all about what was just touched upon by the first session that we had, which is who is the green industrial transition really for? So we're going to look at how we can put people at the very center of this transition that we need to make, because we know, even while we're talking about technology and markets and megatrends transitions that we see that need to happen, they don't happen in the abstract, right? People are affected by them. At the very core, it's about accessibility for people. It's about the equity that is sort of the underlying bottom line condition for it that we need to have, because it happens in communities, in labor markets, for young people, women, marginalized communities, indigenous people. And this panel is all about that. How do we put people at the very center of this transition and transformation that we need to make, which is so vital, because we need to ensure that we don't risk repeating the exclusions from the past that have happened. That is what we're going to dive into. We have an amazing lineup of speakers, which we'll get to in a second. But before we do, I am a little curious to hear from you here in the room, how you sort of look at these topics. So I don't know, for those of you who were very sharp-minded with us here yesterday, you know what we did. I have a couple of statements that I will read out in a little bit. If you agree with the statement, I will ask you to stand up. And if you disagree, you may remain seated. As I always say, there is no room for nuance in this game, but of course I do that on purpose, just to see where you sort of stand with this. So I have my very first statement pertaining to putting people at the center of the transition. And it is as follows. It's a bit of a provocative one, so I'm curious to see what you think. My statement is, we have gotten better at counting emissions than we have at counting who benefits. Please stand up if you think that we're better at counting emissions than counting who benefits, who's affected by them. Okay, that's a lot of people. Okay, now I say freeze. Everybody that stands, remain standing. Everybody that's sitting down, sit. No. You know why? At some point there's peer pressure, and then you're like, everybody's standing up and I'm sitting down, and then you're like, but I like what I see, or do I like what I see? I just want to hear maybe from a couple of people what makes them a bit more optimistic, what makes them perhaps a bit more critical on the matter. Let me just also see how I can turn this one on. Is it on? It is not on, but I will take different microphone. I'm keeping you a bit in suspense, but let me see. I'm gonna walk into the room and I try to find people that avoid eye contact. So if you don't want to be chosen, look at me very intently. Hi, sir. Would you mind sharing who you are and why you agree with the statement? I'll hold it for you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Martin Niemetz from Odessa. I agree with, I see a lot of familiar faces. I agree with the statement because I think that counting the benefits is very complex. So I think there's so many different areas where you would have to look at. I mean, is this resilience? Is it adaptation? Is it et cetera, et cetera? So that's basically my standpoint.
But that's interesting. It's more of a technical take, as in like that we quantifying sort of benefits, which are sometimes also in the social and other ways, is harder than just counting hard emissions, so to say. Thank you so much. Now I'm looking for somebody that is sitting down. Oh, I said that and I saw people that were sitting, they jumped up. Let's see. I don't see any anymore. It seems that everyone, oh, where? Oh, you see, this is amazing when it's like pointed out. Where? You were pointing in the back. Oh, yeah, no, I think those are just people that are here, maybe. Hi. Good morning. Hi. I don't want to throw you off guard. Were you sitting down because you disagree with the statement or because you were very busy with your morning email chain and prep? I think kind of, that's okay. We'll forgive it for now. You know what?
Actually, I was standing before.
Okay. Do you want to share why you agree? Then maybe we'll go to you.
Because counting emissions is something that we've been doing. There is a lack of data to do that. There is a panel to discuss this in the end of the day today. But benefits is something that is really not being accounted for. And also the consequences of climate change on people is also not so clear to everybody. See what's going on in Texas right now. So how much does it cost? How much really people lose their lives? The benefits and the things that is wrong is not being accounted for, I think. Not enough.
Okay.
Otherwise, we would go faster.
Yeah, I think so too. Thank you so much. May we have a big round of applause, everyone, for participating. I would say it's quite striking how many people were standing up. And then I'm leaving out the ones at the end that jumped. I'm joking, that jumped up. But it's quite striking to see the numbers in that sense. So I would say that I think only underlines the importance of this very session that we need to have, of this pillar that we're focusing on. So I would say let's just kick it right off, because I'm very happy that we can do that with somebody who will spark us off on this morning. So I'm thrilled to welcome a voice who brings both a diplomatic sort of expertise, but also a sense of urgency as to what needs to happen. She is the head of the Renewable Energy Division at Brazil's Ministry of External Relations. Please, everyone, can we have a big round of applause for Mrs. Laís de Souza Garcia? And I would say the stage is all yours.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here today, and a pleasure to see this super interesting conversation going on about just transitions. It's something that Brazil has been discussing for a while now, and that we believe we have some insights about. But I wanted to start with the last kind of rhetorical question that was asked in the last panel, because I think it's a very good one. So what does it mean to listen to the voices of the Global South? And I think we are trying to, and I think the exercise here today means that there is efforts towards it. But I would like to go a little bit more in depth and very fast, because I know I don't have a lot of time. And I will use the Brazilian Energy Transitions Working Group, the G20 Energy Transitions Working Group last year as an example of how can we listen to the voices of the Global South, because I think it was something that helped us go into more detail on what does it mean. And I'm going to give you a heads up. It just not only means energy access. And this is something that is really important. Energy access is the most basic thing that we need to care about but it's not even the beginning of the whole story. So during the Energy Transitions Working Group last year, we decided to approach the energy transitions problem from a global south perspective. So we used Brazil's example and our experience to try to set the conversation around things that we thought were important to be addressed when it comes to energy transitions. And we divided the conversation into 3 pillars. So when we talked about access to financing, which we all know and we discussed at length here today, is something very important. We didn't focus about maybe on the obvious thing, where are the funds, but we focused on energy planning, because we think it's very, very important. And when it comes to just transitions, empowering and capacity building for authorities, for policymakers, for the government is the most important thing. And maybe that missing link that will help us connect the financing with good projects, with good energy planning, with good industrial planning. So we focus on energy planning, and we launched a global coalition on energy planning. We have partnered with IRENA to do that, and it's been an interesting journey, and we think this can contribute a lot to global south countries, to policymakers that want to think on long term. How are we going to do our industrial policy? How are we going to provide energy access? How are we going to reduce emissions in the energy sector? And how can we build capacity to do that? So when we talked about financing, we talked about energy planning. And then we decided to talk about just transitions, but more specifically, we developed and approved as a consensual document 10 principles on just and inclusive energy transitions. It was a very broad exercise. We brought a lot of stakeholders into this conversation. And there is one principle. So we approved 10 principles. But the principle that I really want to emphasize here today is the technology neutrality principle. And why do I think this is such an important principle and something that we often overlook? Because when we are talking about considering local voices, considering what we can do and what we can identify as the best solution locally, when we have policy, when we have trade policy, when we have financial or access to financing that does not have technology neutrality embedded in it, we are going to harm developing countries' technologies. Things that were locally developed, that have proven their value, but because it's not the same technology or the same solution that the North has chosen, we are not going to get the financing that we need because this solution is not legitimate enough or is not recognized as a sustainable solution, as a solution that will bring local development. So that's the one principle that I would like to highlight. And then moving on to the third pillar of our work on the G20, and it's gonna be the last one. When we discussed sustainable fuels and the role of sustainable fuels in the net zero future. How can sustainable fuels, along with electrification, help us get to net zero emissions? And specifically on that conversation, we chose to focus on carbon accounting. And again, this is a very important conversation because I was very interested today in the roundtables that we had, because of the one of the topics that were brought up very often was the need for standards, right? How can we scale solutions? How can we trade? How can we finance without standards? We are financing a type of energy. How can we define what the type of energy is, or that specific solution is? So we need to talk about how to assess carbon intensity. We need to talk about how can we harmonize rules, how can we harmonize standards so we can actually have trade, we can have scale, we can have solutions that are affordable. So these are the three things that we discussed during G20. And I really like to share this example because I think that when it comes to just transitions, I think we are ready. We know it's important to be inclusive, to be just, but I think we need to go a little bit deeper. We are ready to do that. The conversations need to go a little bit further down so we can actually go and attack those problems and focus on overcoming the hurdles. So let's go a little deeper. I hope the next panelists can do that. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Maybe once more have a big round of applause, everyone, for Mrs. Lais de Souza Garcia. And I would say you sparked us off right sharply, I think, to the very core of the discussion that we're bound and supposed to have. So I would say let's jump right into it. And for that, I'm very pleased to welcome our panel to explore how we can operationalize sort of this people-centered agenda and approach. And for that, I want to welcome first off to the stage the Director General of IRENA. May we please have a big round of applause, everyone, for Mr. Francesco La Camera. Then the Deputy Minister of Electricity and Energy of South Africa. A big round of applause for Mrs. Samantha Graham Marais. Please do join us. Then a big round of applause for Vice President for Public Sector Operations at the OPEC Fund. Please give it up for Mrs. Shaima El Shaibi. Head of the Clean Energy Ministerial Secretariat. A big round of applause for Mr. Jean-François Gagné. And last but certainly not least, a big round of applause for President and co-founder of the European Youth Energy Network. A big round of applause for Mr. Federico Barbieri. Welcome to all of you. Please do join us right here on stage. I'll just scooch myself in with you guys. Find a seat, find a seat, find a seat. Okay, we got everyone. We got a bigger panel today, but that's, I think, no pressure to you guys. I think that's maybe a promise for more insights and perspectives regarding the topic, because I think there's a lot to cover here, right? When we talk about sort of putting people at the very center of this transition. And Mr. La Camera, if I can start with you, I wanted to ask you about the fact, I mean, we know that IRENA's data also shows, right, that we need around 30, or that we could have 38 million jobs that could be created in the renewable energy sector by 2030. At the same time, we also know that sort of realizing this potential, it requires that we sort of also anticipate future skills that are needed. How would you say that countries can best align their sort of workforce strategies with the energy transition in that sense? I think there's help coming for the microphone. Oh, it works. I had the same thing.
2023, we registered, I think, 60 million point two jobs in the renewable energy area.
Mr. La Camera, I think you need to hold it a bit closer.
What we think that may happen with the right policies, that we can jump to 30 million in 2030. When we look about strictly to the renewable energy sector, but if you look also to the energy efficiency and work on the flexibility, so the grids and other, we can reach a number very close to 100 million. So it's a substantial support for creating job and well-being when we look at the energy transition. How we can get there? You know that we, in our narrative, we made very clear that as we are going in the right direction in terms of the energy transition, so we have every year a new record of renewable installed capacity. More than 90% of new installed capacity last year was renewable. So I think the market is say very clearly where we are going. But if we are going the right direction, we are not going at the speed and the scale that is needed. And we say there are some structural barrier. They are making our pace not so consistent with the achievement of the Paris Agreement goal.
Which ones are they, those barriers?
Some barriers, structural barriers.
Yeah.
We say that's one is the infrastructure. So the lack of grids that are interconnected, flexible, balanced. We say that the legal environment is still looking at the old system, centralized and based on fossil fuel.
Yeah.
But the third important barrier is exactly that we have not yet the capacity, the institutional capacity, also the workers that may fit in the new energy system that is coming,
right? And
also looking at the future of how this will evolve. So it's very important that we look at this aspect because it's arming in some
Right.
ways slowing
Yeah.
our pace.
Yeah.
So naturally, if the first things that come to our mind is that if we are moving from a centralized energy system to a decentralized one based on renewables, this means that the task force has to be reskilled in some way. We need training for that, and these are the most obvious things that may come to our mind. But the fact is that we are changing the way we are producing energy. We are changing how our economic system works. So this will be not enough. So we need to invest, for example, in the education. So starting on the curriculum at the schools as and university.
Yeah.
So it's important. I think also our colleague from Brazil make clear that sometimes we plan how much renewable energy we have to deploy, but we don't plan all other things that has to be planned together.
Right. So sort
when
of
you
the
look at the
conditions around
long-term
it.
planning, for example, it's not just to foresee what could be in terms of renewable capacity, GDP, and others, but also look at what kind of professions, what kind of people we need
Right.
to
We need to have
sustain
workforce around
the world that is coming.
Yeah.
So I think this area, someone has referred to the standards. It's also a question to be sure that the people that is trained is trained in a way that they can get the same result in terms of professionalism in the south, in the north, in the east and the west. It's also important to see in terms of professionalism.
To make sure that we, I actually want to follow up on this point because I mean, I
Please.
hear two things. It's on the one hand, making sure that indeed we have equal access also to the opportunities. Mrs. El-Shaibi, if I can go to you, because if we hear sort of the scale of the opportunity, I mean, 38 million jobs that we could have by 2030, making sure that we have broad sort of like access to it. We can see sort of the scale of the opportunity. At the same time, we know that sort of access to that opportunity remains a little bit out of reach. If we just look at the general stats, we see that less than 10% of all climate finance reaches local actors. I think women-led enterprises within the realm is like 2 to 3% of global venture capital that they're able to acquire. How would you say that the OPEC fund is working to sort of also shift that paradigm in that sense?
Thank you very much, Handra. So good morning to you all. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here in this panel. So the topic of energy transition and a just transition is a very important one for the OPEC fund. You have to understand that this, of course, is part of our DNA. At the OPEC fund, we are very proud to say that we are the only global MDB that is South-South mandated. And this brings into discussion the topic that Lace, our colleague from Brazil, has mentioned, which is we're not focused on source, we're focused on best practices that have been developed and implemented in the South and that can be replicated in the South.
Right.
So this is first up there.
Yeah.
Second point is that, of course, being a South-South mandated institution, we are very much focused on vulnerable communities, women and youth most specifically, right? And as you've rightly said, the numbers speak loud for themselves. So in Latin America, 40% of MSMEs are owned and run by women. And this is a great opportunity. In Africa, which is the region of our largest involvement, you can see that the more than 60% of the population is below the age of 25. And this is another huge opportunity. In Asia Pacific, women, more than 90% of the women are literate. And this is another huge opportunity. But we often see that the vulnerable communities, women and youth, are often do not often realize their full potential. And that's because they do not have access to financing, to digital infrastructure, and to capacity building. So a fun fact that despite the fact that more than 90% of women in Asia Pacific are literate, only 30% are actually part of the workforce.
Right.
And this is something that we've been trying hard to work on. So we address these issues through two main conduits at the OPEC fund. The first is providing bespoke financing to facilitate the integration of women, youth, vulnerable communities into the workforce, providing them with the greatest opportunities possible. And the second is to do what is absolutely necessary, why you made us stand up, is monitoring and evaluation.
Right.
Right.
How do you do that? Like sort of the tracking and the monitoring, what does that look like?
Yeah, exactly. So the first is, I just want to share about the OPEC fund. So we are, as I said, the global MDB. We have last year successfully deployed $2.4 billion in commitments. We plan from now to 2030, $20 billion. We work over 4 main operational priorities. The first is large infrastructure. And here, through our ESG framework, we ensure that employability, etc., are within each and every of our projects. The second is human capital development, and we focus a lot on MSMEs, and this is through not only public sector but also our colleagues in private sector. We've just signed a loan with Banesco to on-lend $10 million to women-led enterprises in Latin America. We also have, of course, a very interesting arm, which is our policy, providing policy-based loans to ensure that the ecosystem is there to support the marginalized communities, vulnerable communities, and so on.
As well.
And then, of course, since 2022, we've put together the OPEC Fund Results Framework, where we are measuring, monitoring, and tracking all the developments across. So that's just a brief introduction. I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's more to it, and I'd love to dive into that a bit further in a bit. In the meantime, I mean, one thing is becoming clear. It's also like this transition that we're making, like it has also some dilemma sort of situations that occur. And Deputy Minister Graham Murray, if I could go to you, I wanted to ask you, I mean, South Africa is one of the few countries also with the comprehensive just energy transition investment plan behind it. And in the plan, you guys also mentioned sort of that your efforts to transition away, for example, from coal, that they could potentially affect a significant number of workers, right? I think 90,000 direct jobs is the number that was mentioned also in the report. And I just wanted to ask you, how do you sort of navigate the dilemma of those risks? How's your government sort of working to address those risks, so to say, on the ground, especially then for vulnerable workers and communities as well?
Thank you very much, and it's a privilege to be here today. So, and this is it's an issue that's very close to us as a country. South Africa has a saying, not about us, without us. And we feel very strongly that community engagement has to be put, front and center of everything that we do. So as you rightly said, we have about 91,000 jobs that are directly in the coal economy. About 46,000 households have at least one person who works within the coal economy in Mpumalanga, which is where our coal belt is. And that's obviously where the majority of the focus will be in terms of the just energy transition. Because 85% of our power is coal-fired.
Right.
So we have 2 dilemmas with respect to a just energy transition. The first is, we have had a number of years where we've had very poor energy security. We've had rolling blackouts up to 12 hours a day. In 2023-24, we had 329 days that were impacted by rolling blackouts.
Oh, wow.
It's significantly affected our economy. It has significantly affected our unemployment. We have the highest unemployment rate in the world at an expanded rate of 42%. So, and of that, 70% of youth are unemployed in South Africa. So we have a major hurdle to climb in terms of addressing energy security through our decarbonization. So we have to make sure that we are protecting our energy while we decarbonize, but we also have to protect jobs. And as I keep saying to everybody, for every job we're going to lose in the coal economy, we have to create at least 3 or 4 more jobs if we are going to uplift our country.
Yeah.
So it's not just a like-for-like conversion, it's a 1 to 3 or 1 to 4 ratio that we have to address.
Yeah.
The only way we're going to do that is through skills development. And one of the other mistakes that South Africa has made over the last few years is that we have focused a lot on tertiary education in the university space. What we're finding is that in the renewable space, we actually need artisans. We need welders, we need electricians, we need builders, we need construction managers. So we're going to have to also shift our skills focus away from a tertiary education to an artisan level. As somebody said to me the other day, we need to re-glamorize artisan skills.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lovely way of putting it. So one of the ways we're doing that is, well, we've got a South African Renewable Energy Master Plan, which we've just launched, and that speaks to the reindustrialization of the South African economy in the renewable energy space. But one of the major focuses of that is skills. It's about developing skills. And we've launched a platform called Power Up. And what that is it's a collaboration between industry, government, and tertiary education. And it's a demand-led skills platform. In other words, industry will come to the platform and say, these are the skills we need for this environment. Because even at this stage, we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what skills we're going to need in the future. And as this technology evolves, there are going to be different skills that are required. So industry will come and say, these are the skills we need. And then tertiary education can say, well, okay, we have courses that meet those needs. We don't have courses that meet those. Let's develop those.
And then they alter sort of the educational curriculum.
So it's a different approach to how we reskill. So this will be about industry defining what skills are then developed.
In a very direct way, right?
In a very direct way, directly, correct, yes.
It does.
So we're very excited. It's a really innovative, it's been launched by our Energy and Water Sectoral Education and Training Authority. We call them CETAs. And it's been done with a number of our partners. We've got a number of our tertiary education, our universities and our technical and vocational colleges on board for that. So that is going to be a major focus of what we do, because if we're not upskilling people, then they're not employable. Another thing we have is that people lack the skills. Because so many people are unemployed and their parents are unemployed, we're finding that people lack soft skills when they're coming into the workspace. People don't know how to write a CV. People don't know how to write a letter, a covering letter. They don't know how to answer a phone professionally. I mean, those seem like, basic skills. But if you're not in an environment where that is an everyday occurrence, it's not a skill that you're going to develop. So we also need to look at the soft skills that are going to make people employable. Because if you have 300 people who've come out of a university or a training center with the same skill set, how do they differentiate themselves? So there's a lot of our focus is going to be on that upskilling element. And then also, as I say, trying to also bring people out of the coal economy into the renewable energy sector. We've already got companies that are looking at how they can change that skill set to make them employable in a new environment. So those are some of the focal areas.
I was going to say, if I summarize, then I mean, you said, and also the example in itself already, I think is something that probably can be so beneficial to everyone here in the room, because it's such a tangible, concrete way of like directly linking people. Because also, as Ms. Lacamera said, we cannot anticipate what we're going to need, right? We have all these projections and we know we need to scale up, but like to know which specific skills are needed, I mean, it's a big question mark to some extent. To some extent we do know, but then this is like an amazing way in which we can sort of directly have that communication link. I love how you said we need to re-glamorize artisan skills also. Also, thank you for sharing your specific country context, because I think it means a lot probably also to sort of see how you're also working on that soft skill side in that sense. And I love what you said at the very start, nothing about us without us. And in light of that spirit, I wanted to go to you, Mr. Barbieri, because I mean, when we look at sort of like young people, we know that, I mean, you work to sort of represent youth voices in the energy systems across Europe. We do see that worldwide. I mean, I think everywhere there is an underrepresentation of young people in decision-making spaces. So I was curious to hear from you in the spirit of nothing about us without us. What do you think is sort of needed, and what role should young people play in sort of shaping this green industrial policy from your perspective? This, I think, at the bottom, this is the
technology. Yeah. Thank you. So I think the question we need to ask ourselves is, why is there underrepresentation at the moment? And I feel it also linked to the climate, to the progress that we are doing towards fighting climate change. It's about the lack of awareness of the benefits and of the potential of intervening and of supporting, for example, communities. For the specific case of young people and women, the question is that we should ask ourselves is not what's their role, but what's their potential. Because if we ask ourselves, what's your role, then you're sort of establishing top down what what you should do, what work you should, and this is based on the need of the industry. At the same time, we need to reverse the way we approach the reskilling and upskilling of people. And I want to bring you some facts to demonstrate the fact that including young people and women does not benefit only young people and women, but society as a whole.
Right.
There's a study that says that if gender diverse companies have 25% more profitability compared that on average. This is a fact.
Yeah.
You cannot counter that. Something that I also found out recently, and it was quite surprising for me, that we are all discussing about how can we reduce CO2 at the lowest cost of society. And I found out that CO2 can be reduced at lower cost through decentralized projects. Centralized projects, due to economy of scales, are needed, but I feel sometimes we underestimate the decarbonization potential that investing in communities, young people and women had. And a recent report from the European Commission's released this year said that for every euro that you invest in green workforce trainings and upskilling, up to 3 to 5 euros can be recovered in productivity, emission reductions, and tax revenues. So we need to, when we invest, we need to think it's not just about the technology, but it's about the people who make the technology. So my first message is don't underestimate the potential. And this is the first message. When it comes to the role, what role of people that young people can have, I think I'm talking about our role as an industry, as an association, is to give them guidance. Because now when I talk to different industries, I talk to the wind industry and say, we need more wind technicians. I talk to the solar industry and we need more solar technicians. Everybody needs more people, but nobody is telling them how they can reach, how can they be trained, and how can they be upskilled. And I feel personally we have a role as youth organizations in being your communication channel. You can tell us what you need, and we can develop tools so that we can reach as many young people as possible and young women.
Right, so there's mobilizing potential there
Because
as well.
this is what we want to create as the
Yeah.
European Youth Energy Network. We want to create the largest young professional network in Europe, but not just for the sake of making a network, but for the sake of making sure that opportunities from the industry, from the government, can reach as many people as possible.
Yeah.
And also we can make education as accessible
Right.
as possible.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that you started off with something that really stuck with me, which is it's not just about the role, it's the potential that people can bring. And you mentioned, I wrote it down, the example of more diverse boards, they perform better, so it's very tangibly proven. And I mean, luckily we've gotten better at sort of like improving when we talk about diversity, sort of gender diversity in boardrooms, but age diversity is another one, right, that we oftentimes overlook. So, I mean, when you say boardrooms, it's a decision-making place, so including them there as well, at the end of the day, it's sort of like covering each other's blind spots, which makes for better sort of like assessments and decisions that we make. And young people bring different perspectives in that sense that may cover a blind side that could potentially be overlooked in some of the decisions that we make. I think there's a lot in there that we can also draw from. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe when we talk about inclusion of youth, sometimes I feel some people that are scared because they imagine, oh, do I need to put an 18 years old as CEO of my company?
Right.
No, this is not about having a lot of, because to be like, we have to be acknowledged, we have to acknowledge the fact that as young people, we have different skills, but we lack knowledge. And knowledge is something that you build with time. This is something that you cannot go around it.
Yeah.
So what you need to do, if it's a step-by-step approach, so you don't need to put at 18 years old as CEO. I mean, there are some companies that have 18 years old as CEO,
Yeah.
but it's about really giving the opportunity of the young people in your company to shape your policy. You need to consult them, then you can decide whether to take or not into account
Right.
these.
It's about, you're saying it's about breaking this homogenous sort of trend that we see in certain places. Like if we have a very homogenous sort of profile of decision makers, then naturally there will be blind spots. But taking in young people, perhaps they may not have the 40 years of experience, but they may have the long-term thinking, and they may have the flexibility of not being rusted into certain thinking patterns. Perhaps they lack the sort of like conflict of interest, which makes it more free.
And
I wanted to talk about this further in a little bit, but I actually want to go to Mr. Gagne, because I think there's more here to dive into. But first I wanted to go to you, Mr. Gagne, because you lead the the Clean Energy Ministerial's work on people-centered transitions. And I wanted to ask you what you would say that some of the key lessons and insights from your work are that you would say should shape global just transition efforts in that regard.
Does this work now?
Yeah,
terrific.
nice.
So yeah, I mean, we've been at the SEM looking at this issue of how to look at socioeconomic aspects and how to involve people since we were born 15 years ago. And in fact, I'll refer back to the previous panel when somebody talked about the difference between should and do. It's interesting how we often talk about these are things that we should do because they're good, morally. But as an implementation platform, we actually realize we need to do them to be able to do. So we don't look at these issues about people as something that is nice to do. It's essential. If we don't have the people and the skills to be able to do the clean energy transition, we will fail as well as if we didn't have the policies or the technology. So this has really been on a practical approach of what do we need to do to make sure that we have the workforce that we need to assess our needs, that we've been doing this. And so let me just maybe focus on 3 concrete examples. And it was very interesting about the youth aspect. In 2019, in our ministerial, we worked with a group called Student Energy. We convened, I think.
You were there.
Exactly.
So the whole reason why I'm here is because I attended the Clean Energy Ministry in 2019.
Oh, wow.
That was the start of my, let's say, youth engagement into an energy space. And just this event created all the subsequent effects of the creation of the European Energy Network. So don't underestimate the potential and the benefits that just an event can have by including young people.
The butterfly effect, small world also. Yeah.
And so the purpose, we actually brought youth from 40 different countries, provinces, it was in Canada, and Indigenous people to really bring all these aspects. And we gave them airtime with ministers, with senior officials to be able to have these discussions. And in fact, out of that, we have great follow-ups, but also some of the ministries actually created young youth advisory boards. So not necessarily put them as a minister, but direct contact within the minister's office to be able to address this. So being able to bring that lens into it. Then we have an initiative that's called the Equality in Energy Transitions Initiative. And this has been, this was created at the beginning of the SEM because we realized that if we are going to succeed, we can't shut out 50% of the talent out there. So again, it was a very practical approach to doing this. What we've been doing, I was kind of positively standing up this morning just because it's true we are still better at measuring emissions. But we have been doing a lot in terms of measuring other aspects of the transition. We've been working with the IEA and many others in terms of looking at gender parity and the gender workforce. We're now extending to broader inclusivity aspects such as youth. And in support of Brazil's inclusivity framework last year during their G20, we released an inclusivity framework that looks at how you can look at different the dimensions of the work you're doing to make sure you have proper representation into the inputs that you are gathering and how you analyze them to have kind of inclusive outputs moving forward.
Right.
And this is an example where we'd be very happy to work with UNIDO in terms of the Industrialization Pact on building on that framework to make sure that we continue on this. And then on skills and workforce, very interesting, the discussion we're having in terms of some people's job will be affected by the energy transition. Again, when we looked at it, it was more like we need a lot of skilled people to be able to succeed. So, coming from the discussions that were happening at COP24 on the Just Transition Declaration, we kind of said, okay, let's flip the narrative around. It's not about the jobs that are going to be losses. It's about the jobs that are needed.
Right.
And so we started looking at this and really start looking at the skills issues and skill mapping in a very broad aspect. Very interesting, the point about, skilled, what is a skilled workforce? Do you need a university degree to be skilled? Right. But also very interesting to think about, it's not just technical. We need lawyers. We need financiers. There's a lot of skills that are needed to transition, that need to evolve, need to be changed. And one of the things that we have been looking on top of data and policy support is looking at sharing that experience. Very interesting about the curriculum development. One of the key issues is there are multiple people developing different curriculum to address similar issues. Yeah. Can we use the power of multilateral collaboration to share that? We've been looking at ways where universities could basically get directly interconnected so that they can exchange their own best practices in terms of the curriculum development and be able to fast track the adoption of those curricula in different aspects. And so again, very happy to see how we can do that. And so I guess in a bottom line, there is a lot happening there. We're very happy to be able to be here and continue to share that aspect. We will have our ministerial in Busan at the end of August, where a lot of these discussions will also be shared. We're inviting everyone to see how we can use outcomes from this to basically lead us to the implementation path.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing also. I mean, those are also very concrete and tangible ones to look at in that sense. I mean, we keep on sort of coming back, right, to this sort of like broad range of change and addition, actually, in a way that we need to the workforce. Mr. Lacamera, if I can go to you, because I mean, we spoke earlier about sort of like the sort of skill, right, the magnitude of the amount of workers that we could potentially need by 2030 in the renewable energy sector. I wanted to ask, how would you say that we can also ensure that many of these new green jobs, particularly also in emerging economies, meet standards also for decent work? Because I think that's something that is an ongoing worry also, that, you know, also when we look at sort of like critical minerals that are needed, how do we make sure that they're decent, that they meet the standards for decent work as well?
So make sure is a little bit strong, not? First of all, I wish to make clear that, at least in my opinion, the question is not if this will happen or not happen. This will happen.
Yeah.
The question that we have in front of us is the speed and the scale of this. Because the market has already made their choices, as I say before. So all this, the new reskilling, a more just, say, enjoyment of the benefits, and this will happen. The question is that facing the climate change means we have to do everything in a shorter period. So this is the reason policies become to be crucial.
Yeah.
So cannot be only the market. If we trust only the market, we will be late. So we need the right policy to make in place. One thing is naturally the social engagement. So how we can make the society accept all the changes that are happening and make this changing happening faster. So the social dialogue is absolutely relevant. I always put as a good example something that happened a couple of years ago in a different situation, perhaps in the United States, where they have been able, working with the unions, to make possible to accept transfer of workers from one sector to another, and make the policies make this possible in a smooth way.
Right.
So this has to happen everywhere. And it also has to happen in taking into account how the international cooperation should work on that. We always say that we have to rewrite the way the international cooperation work, because if we don't do that, this will become more and more difficult. You know, we have been discussing in Baku last year, and when we launched this call for action for skilling workers, that was launched by Germany, and others are coming in this initiative. It is very important. It's very important also working on regional aspects, so make regions working together, make clear how the transformation is possible, and this could be something that's in the interest of everyone. So it's very complex to say, working on the standard, you know. For example, we are making exercise for getting standard of qualifying people on working on offshore wind in Southeast Asia. Because if not, it will be not possible to have the offshore wind companies going invest there unless they bring their workers.
Right.
So there are all these aspects that has to be working together. But again, the first things to understand is that this is the way where politics and policies and social dialogue is absolutely crucial to succeed domestically, but also in international relationship.
Yeah, that's a good one. And also the importance of social dialogue that you sort of touch upon there. I want to continue talking with you guys, but in the meantime, I was just curious to see in the audience if there's any maybe pressing question for one of our panelists. Just looking around to see. I see a hand going up there. Yes, please. If you could shortly say who you are and ask your question briefly, then we can take it off.
Yeah, hi. It's me again. Very quickly, I see
us discussing here just transition from a dimension of green jobs, always connected to somehow to renewables, put together renewables, the renewables industry, and so on and so forth. In a lot of the discussion around access. But what about us discussing like inequity, meaning how can we use green industrialization to make us more equitable in terms of development, social development and economic development? Is this something that we could consider there? Is this something that we could bring some quality jobs to the global south by the green industrialization, not only the renewables sector, but also steel, cement, glass, whatever sector? Can we aggregate value closer to where the resources are, and by this creating quality jobs there? What is your impression? I don't have one specific, but anyone can answer that.
Yeah, I'm really
Thank
curious.
you.
Thank you so much also for the question. I saw some nodding happening. I don't know, is there somebody that wants to, Deputy Minister, would you like to?
Yeah. So South Africa is my...
Thank you very much, and thank you for the question. And you're absolutely correct, because the green economy is not just renewables. So I mean, obviously, one of the areas that we're looking at is, as well as hydrogen as a vector for dealing with our hard to abate sectors, but also as an entirely new industry. And you talk about equality. One of the things I'm finding is that with green hydrogen being such a nascent industry, we are finding that women and youth are taking up positions in that industry because it's not a previously dominated environment where it was dominated by men and older men.
Right.
So what we're seeing is this evolution, this organic development of equity within the green hydrogen space in particular, where women and youth are taking the lead.
Yeah.
And I think because there's that innovation, there is that appetite for new. So that's been interesting to watch, is this organic equality taking place in the green economy.
Yeah.
The other thing is, as you said, you have to look at your spatial planning around your green economy. So you have to bring the jobs to where the people are. And so we're looking at the green hydrogen, we're looking at green steel in one part of our country that will then be developed, and we can create a green hydrogen corridor that we're looking at with Namibia that will run between the two countries that can develop jobs in that space. So people don't have to relocate to go and find the work will come to them. It's the same with green ammonia on the east coast of South Africa, where we are bringing the jobs to the people that have the skill set in that area. And Mpumalanga, which is our coal belt, it's about taking the transition to them and not making them relocate.
Right.
So it's really important that we are taking the jobs to people and not making them
Instead
go
of them
out and look
coming
for
for the
them.
jobs, yeah.
So that's how we're addressing that equity question. I hope
Yeah.
I've answered your question.
Thank you also for answering, and thank you for the question. It's a really good one in that sense. Mrs. Shaibi, if I can go to you, I wanted to go to you more to sort of focus on also the role of multilateral development banks in that sense, and like public finance institution. What role would you say that they can also play in de-risking inclusive green investments to really catalyze private sector participation also?
Thank you very much. But before I go to that, I'd like to pick up on
Please
the
do,
answer.
yeah.
So, it's very crucial to understand that, yes, greening the economy brings a lot of employment. And so we have a climate action plan at the OPIC Fund that is built on 4 pillars: mitigation, adaptation, nature-based solutions, and small island developing states resilience. And mitigation is really focused on the energy transition part. And here we've discussed that extensively, but there is a lot of opportunities also in the field of adaptation, where there is agriculture support. And here the role of youth and women is exemplary. There's also nature-based solutions. And you can see that across Asia Pacific, where bamboo forest or, coastal protection results in shrimp farms that are owned by women and by youth, and this is direct employability. And therefore, I'm happy that we've heard from South Africa at the country level, but also at the multilateral development bank level, there are these initiatives and products that can incentivize better employability for women and youth across different sectors under climate and under green. So that's my answer to that. But thank you for your answer. So of course, the multilateral development banks have a key role in de-risking private sector investments. And that comes at different levels. First, again, don't want to be repeating myself, but at the policy level, it's very important that each and every government has the necessary policy framework to allow for this to happen. Often case, some countries are more developed than others, even in the developing world. And the developed countries have these policy frameworks. The lesser developed ones have none. And this is what we've been working on very closely with governments. We have our policy arm where we provide policy-based support. And here, part of that is to ensure that there is a climate framework. Another part is for social inclusion. And finally, to ensure that there is the platform for de-risking private capital. And when it comes to de-risking private capital, we have also the blended finance tool. We have several tools, but there's one tool that is very interesting. We have a hub that we've actually established with UNIDO and Sustainable Energy for All. It's not at the very large scale of large infrastructure projects like the ASEAN power grid that we're supporting, but it's at the very small scale of clean cooking. This is called the Climate Innovation and Energy Transition Hub, where we provide end-to-end solutions to countries. We piloted Madagascar, now we're working on Malawi and Sierra Leone. And what we do is we support the governments to put a policy framework that supports a just energy transition. We then provide grants from the OPEC fund as well as the OPEC member countries to do project preparation, because at the end of the day, we can have all great ideas, but if the project is not feasible and scalable, it's useless. So that's another aspect. So we make projects ready, and then bring in co-financing partners, because as you know, the trillions required, you cannot possibly cover that by yourself. And so what UNIDO does in that is provides technical assistance and the decision on the product used for clean cooking. In Africa alone, 2 billion people lack access to clean cooking solutions. There are many options. There is LPG, there is bioethanol, there are many grids, and UNIDO supports us in determining which is the best solution. But at the end of the day, the result is that there is a woman there that normally spends 9 hours to chop off the wood, pick up the wood, come home to cook a meal for the family. The result is that this lady now has much more time to go to study, to go to learn in order to join the workforce in a way that does not actually damage her health. So also the granular level is very important. Speaking finally on providing support to educate and skill and reskill the populations. We're also working very closely with countries across, especially Asia Pacific again, like China, where we're building the largest TEV, so Technical Education, Vocation and Training Institutes. And these are all very much climate focused. The curricula is to advance climate action through energy transition, but also adaptation and nature-based solutions.
Which
and
upon the
AI, which is of course the most critical for youth and women. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's one that's been recurring as well, AI and technology in that sense, and how vital that is to also quickly emerging trends, so to say. I wanted to go, Mr. Barbieri, maybe briefly, like hearing all of this, I mean, we're constantly talking about how we can also make the participatory process inclusive. How do you sort of reflect on what has been said so far, and also on how we can maybe tangible sort of like ways in which we can improve accessibility for young people to spaces?
So I think when we talk about access to decision-making spaces, it's important to remember that this is just the tip of the iceberg, because what is under, it's what is needed so that these decision-making spaces are accessible, but also that we as like young professionals can contribute to the discussion. Because what we always say, we don't want you to invite us just because we're youth, but because you believe that we can bring something else to the table. And in order to bring something different, we're talking about data, like we're also doing some research, for example, on energy poverty in Europe. And we are collecting the first ever survey of how young people are affected by data, by energy poverty. And without data, you cannot make informed decisions. So this is a bit our role we need to play. And if you don't have a structured organization, a youth organization that can can be the contact point between the wider youth and the industry and the government, then I think we are not able to achieve these decision-making spaces, assess these decision-making spaces in an effective way.
Yeah.
And for example, this is not my job. This is what I do during the night. During the day, I am an energy market consultant, and I represent energy companies in Brussels. And one of the reasons why we created AN is because there was, in Brussels, you have the Wind Association, you have the Solar Association, you have the Farmer Association, but there was no youth association in energy.
Right.
And when you don't have representation, then you also fail to deliver specific messages. And this is why having a structured external youth group that can coordinate and represent youth is important. So this group can go to conferences, can engage with different stakeholders and say, we want you to change governance.
Okay. So
we want you to change the way you allocate funding so that you can tackle the issue we talked about at the beginning, about decision-making spaces. Because if we only say, okay, access to youth to decision-making spaces is the challenge, the problem, then we are doing, it's wrong.
Right. It's a
you need to ask how do we enable young people and women to assess their resources so they can go to conferences, can go to these decision-making spaces and have a concrete impact. And I made a small
drawing.
Yeah, drawing was trying to, because it's a iterative process. But and something that maybe is a call for the audience and for also the speakers is that what you need to have at the beginning, what we need to have is a trust.
Right.
And you need to entrust youth organization existing, building on what exists already, and assess potential collaboration with them.
Yeah.
You can also create internally your own projects. You must do.
But you say trust is sort of the precondition for it.
It's a precondition, because without trust, you don't have, I mean, this is in any negotiation.
I think is a good point, because we haven't spoken about that yet, but I think that's a good one to sort of like emphasize. It's always scary to do something new. It's, I mean, including new voices sometimes also means inviting scrutiny over the old way in which things have been done. And that means trusting each other also to sort of pave the way forward like that. Mr. Gagné, I want to go to you for the final question, because I mean, we're going to move into the roundtables in a little bit after our short break. And I mean, we're all working and collecting input also, especially during those sessions, also towards sort of like making this global green industrialization pact. So, I mean, having had this discussion so far on how we can put people how we can have a people-centered approach towards this transition that we need to make, what is one action of which you would say that we need to see sort of more global consensus on? Like, what's one principle that you would say this cannot miss also from that global green industrialization pact that we're working towards?
If I guess the one dimension I would put the emphasis on is collaboration. I mean, just the discussion we had here was great. You know, learning from what's happening in South Africa and other places is great. But if you only do that once in a while in an ad hoc way, you miss on the constant benefits and improvement on these things. So looking at what infrastructure there is out there to maintain that momentum and build on each of these is one of the things we're trying to really do within the SAM, is to connect that. I will build on the point about don't go and reinvent something when there is something out there. So the coordination between these initiatives becomes very, very important. And so being able to build on existing capacity to be able to raise its impact to other constituents is probably one aspect. The other angle of that multilateral collaboration is to make sure that we really make it, you know, global. And there's been a lot of North-North collaboration. There's been a lot of North-South collaboration. There's maybe not been as much South-South collaboration, nor South-North collaboration. This becomes very, very important as, you know, we move forward. You know, I want to go back to Brazil's point at the beginning about making this South-led. I mean, we've been working with Brazil and their G20 presidency and are working with them in the COP30. We're working with South Africa on their G20 presidency, worked with India, UAE in the past, in terms of taking that South leadership in terms of what are the policy priorities and turning that into concrete action and trying to bring an implementation infrastructure to put that to bear. But the leadership needs to come from those countries. The priorities, the driving of the agenda needs to come from where the need is most. And this is what we need to do more, is enable, bring that capacity. The question about how do we make industrialization valuable to everyone, it's being able within the country to realize the power that international collaboration can bring to achieve your own domestic aspects. So this is, and what we've been doing is working with different stakeholders, for example, philanthropies, to bring this infrastructure more easily accessible to the emerging world. We're taking, of course, the opportunity that will be in Korea in August to focus in Southeast Asia. So we've been bringing power system folks to Southeast Asia and ASEAN to help them out. But we really want to be able to continue to work with UNIDO and others in terms of bringing that forward.
Within that spirit of
Exactly, because the key point is there is a lot of knowledge and experience out there, but it doesn't necessarily apply to every single situation. And is this through dialogue and detailed discussions on the context under which those lessons learned that we can really make forward. I'll just bring, we have an initiative that is called Equal by 30, which has been working now for a long time to increase equal leadership, equal pay, and equal opportunity to women in the energy sector. But very interesting, the point about literacy and job access, because, in developed economies, it might be more equal leadership and equal pay. In developing economies, it might just be equal opportunity. So the context and the objectives matter. And let's discuss to make sure that we learn from each other.
I was going to say, I mean, I would have nothing else to add to that. I think that's a really good call to action also for us to end the session on. So may we please have a big round of applause for our formidable panel. I want to thank you all so much. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you. Now, this brings us towards the end of this high-level plenary, but in the spirit of what Mr. Gagne also shared, I mean, it's about coming together and also using, I would say, all the input from this amazing panel in the roundtables in a little bit. Now, a couple of things that are important to mention. We have our roundtables, which officially start at 11. I know we're running a little bit late, but I would say grab a cup of coffee and a tea and maybe just slowly make your way towards the room so that we can start somewhat on time there as well. These are the roundtables that we have. Please note that roundtable 5 will be in room M2 and roundtable 6 will be in room M4. It's important to note that once the roundtables end, we immediately have the lunch break. Now, I know that yesterday some of you had some difficulty finding the location for lunch. It's on the ground floor on building C, but I will say informally, like, just see if you see like a herd of hungry people walking somewhere. That's what I did. You can easily sort of like track them to find the location. So that's an important one to mention. But for now, I would say check out which roundtable you're going to attend. It's a first come, first serve basis, and we do have limited capacity. So I would say make your way there straight away with hopefully something hot in your hand and a little bite to eat. Thank you so much. And then I'll see you back here in plenary later on. Thank you so much. Yeah, let's do it. Thanks. Oh, yeah. Yes, Laïs, would you? Thanks. Yeah, that's a good one. Would you like to join us for the picture? Thanks, Jean-François. Oh, I'm still.